Okay, we are coming towards the end of our event today, so thank you again for being with us. We had one last short 5-minute presentation just to explain a bit in terms of next steps, where we are in terms of the project, which is part of this conference. We just wanted to share what we have done and the next steps. And then just a final discussion just to finalize our event today. There are a lot of takeaways. I was asked by a couple of colleagues, why are we doing this? So I think I'll try to respond this in this presentation, but there are many reasons. As it has been mentioned, and I borrow Anita's language, it's the moment to take stock, because there have been things going on. When we produced this index, a lot of these discussions on fragmentation were just starting. And also, even within ADB operations and program of work, this discussion is important in terms of what we want to do in terms of regional cooperation and integration. So I'll be just very brief of what this measurement that we had during the morning, it's all about. This is something that has been very much in the backbone of ADB's work, the work on regional integration and cooperation. And the use that we give to these measurements is part of ADB's operational priorities, and is one of the indicators that's commonly used to track progress in this priority. So we continue working on several versions, let's say, of these indicators. We try to produce indexes and metrics that are useful for policy discussions like this one, for policy reform. We do benchmarking in different areas that are important for our development member countries. And also we produce new indicators that are relevant in terms of what the economies want us to develop. So we have been working more recently on services trade, for example, or also on student migration. And these are part of indicators that we incorporate into our work. So what we have been developing then is kind of a set of different frameworks that started with what we call the Archie, that was the original index. It has been enhanced to include 2 new dimensions on digital connectivity, environmental sustainability. And now we have expanded to what we call the Global Integration Index. And we continue working with some of our sub-regional programs and initiatives to improve the measurement of especially what we call the intra-sub-regional integration and inter-sub-regional. So how these sub-regional initiatives are connecting with the rest of the region. So there is differences, there are advantages and disadvantages, and I will let just my colleague Mara to explain briefly this part, and with this we will come to finalize.
Good afternoon, everyone. So just a quick summary for the different RCI measurement frameworks that we've been using. So Rolando's already explained the first 4 columns there. Baseline, enhanced, and then the Global Integration Index and the Regional Integration Index, which is consistent with our global integration. So for those indexes, we use principal component analysis to be able to compute for the composite indexes. Just to show also the differences, for the first 2, for Archie, we've been using total values of the indicator with the world as the as a way to normalize the indicators. And then for global integration, we use the size of the reported economy, GDP, population for normalization. So another thing that I want to point out here is that we've also developed a new measurement, which is the bilateral economic integration index, which is based on where we use Bayesian state space approach. So this is purely bilateral flows. And one interesting application of this of this measurement is to be able to use network analysis. So just quickly, we can see here that in 2000, you can see that PRC in Japan is sort of the center for Asia. And you can see also some clusters there in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and even the Pacific and Oceania. In 2021, the same sub-regional groupings are there, but the center now big is PRC with that big node. So let me just go over some of the tools that we have and then where you can find information and knowledge products that we've developed in ADB. So for Archie and the Global Integration Database, we have our own website. So that QR code brings you to the online database for Archie and Global Integration Database. So just quickly, just some examples of what data you can see there. So first is, this is a regional comparison of the Global Integration Index. So you can see there that Europe, the green line, is the most integrated among all the regions that we have here. And then we also present it by dimensions, the 8 dimensions that Rolando mentioned a while ago. So aside from regional comparisons, you can also do country level analysis like this one. So you can choose the countries that you want. So for this instance, we chose 4 countries, and then we see that Singapore is the most integrated among those 4 economies. So you can also do the comparison across dimensions. And then another thing that we've added in the website is our global integration monitor. So this is the report that we've been talking about that was recently released. So you can see the highlights and also the report in that website. Aside from that report, we also have a couple of knowledge products available. So we have other reports such as the Asian Economic Integration Report, and also that's annually published. And also we have several research papers on regional integration, and the latest one is the regional integration using the Bayesian approach that I mentioned a while ago. So let me turn over to Rolando to discuss the future or the next way forward for the project.
So for this project specifically, we will continue working on the customization on the index. We will expand on the new index that was mentioned by Mara of a state space model, which is kind of a new methodology, which some improvements to what was previously the previous indicator. And we will continue working on some of empirical questions. Some of them have been mentioned today. For example, understanding the mechanisms of regional and international cooperation and their impacts, and also looking at the effectiveness of these arrangements. That's a key question that we look often at how many agreements are enforced, but not at the utilization or adoption really of this type of instruments. So I think this is just to provide an overview of why this discussion was important for us today, and your feedback, your suggestions, the issues that you have been raising during the day have been extremely helpful for that. I think with this, we conclude our presentation, and perhaps I just might invite maybe Albert, if you want to say a couple of things about our research agenda on this area, and after that we will have the closing remarks by Jong. Thank you.
A few kind of, I think we're getting towards the end of the event. Remarks about kind of where we're thinking about this research agenda going forward. And one thing that I mentioned earlier was that, you know, ADB has really strongly endorsed open multilateral trade and investment as a key principle of prosperity in the region. And I think IMF and most international organizations, you know, take a similar stance. But given all of the pressures that are affecting open trade and investment these days, I think it's important for us to lead on knowledge work that points out the costs of and impacts of what is happening. This year, for the first year, we launched a new knowledge product in our research department, which is the Asian Development Policy Report. And based on consultations with the ADB president and senior management, we're planning to do a new Asian Development Policy Report on shifting supply chains, not for next year, but for 2026. But for this product, we usually have a 2-year planning window. So we will definitely be investing in the research program on globalization and fragmentation as an important part of thinking about giving some guidance to member countries on how to think about how these changing patterns that we've been talking about today, what they mean in terms of development strategy and policy. So we're going to be, we'll be welcoming, all sorts of ideas and inputs and collaboration on this research program going forward. Listening to today's talks, I, was struck by, a number of things. I mean, the first session, I think there were a lot of interesting patterns. Some of them, I think, contrary to maybe conventional wisdom in terms of whether there is in fact deglobalization. And I thought there were some very interesting patterns about how Asia, differed from other regions of the world. And I think Neil pointed out some of those differences. I think we got to keep doing that and enhance the measurements and keep generating stylized facts to raise questions that we can then investigate. I also thought that we're still, I think Petya made an important point that, now that we actually have a few years of experience with these pressures for deglobalization, that we can actually empirically study what's happening, not just simulate what's happening. At the same point, I think we do need to continue doing simulation studies to inform policymakers who maybe are thinking and considering maybe relatively unwise decisions about, leading even more polarized policies in terms of economic policies. And then thinking about impacts on countries, especially poorer countries in the region, and on workers within countries, I think is still an important research agenda, which is a bit more data challenging, but I think something we would like to pursue. And lastly, I thought some of the discussion and results on digital services trade or services trade were also quite interesting, that they seem to be less affected by globalization. It struck me that perhaps for services, it could be that the specific types of fixed costs that characterize manufacturing are a little bit different than in services, so that there's maybe a greater willingness to invest in service activities, knowing that if the world changes, it's easier to reverse some of those compared to building a huge factory at scale. And so maybe to better understand why we're seeing these different patterns in services will be interesting. But any work on services is important because it's really still, and has been for a while actually, the most dynamic part of international trades. So those are just a few reflections. We're hoping that we would have more time to have some maybe more open reflections on what the research agenda should be going forward. But maybe in the interest of time, I don't know, should we just turn it over to Jong to wrap up?
Thanks, Albert, and thanks, Rolando, for stock-taking major discussions we made today and future direction of what we are heading in terms of conducting more rigorous and analytical research on this very important topic and agenda going forward. So let me just try to share a few of my thoughts based on the the takeaway from today's rich discussions. First, I think some of the globalization or the global fragmentation motive is being driven by the commercial interest of the private sector, but mostly the main driver is being motivated by the states who are concerned about national security, supply chain resilience, or the protection of the domestic job market, and also tech rivalries, among others. In the context of developing economies, I think that although they may not be in the driver's seat in terms of the evolving the geo-economic dynamics, but they may not they may be no less exposed to its impact, in particular negative impact, and in some sense they might be more vulnerable due to their lack of the absorptive and adaptive capacity. In that sense, I think that today's discussion, in particular during the first session, about the various analytical and the monitoring tools and the indexes and metrics are very useful for us to try to inform the policymakers and businesses alike in the region going forward. In coming up with the more accurate and informed decision making going forward. That's number one. Number two, I think if history is any guide, I think any type of artificial or arbitrary policy intervention will entail some degree of negative impact to the economy. But at the same time, as we have discussed quite extensively, flip side of those challenges could lie some degree of the new opportunities, as we have discussed, for example, some ASEAN countries and also the Korea in the case of East Asia and Canada and Mexico in North America are making a lot of the growing number of the export to the US, while at the same time importing a lot of intermediate goods from China. This means again that these countries are positioning themselves as a kind of the conduit place, taking advantage of the global value chains and still connecting the trade linkages across different continents between North America and Asia. Lastly, the regional integration and cooperation has been providing very important and strong buffer against any type of external global shock, including the economic shocks and even geopolitical tensions, as I believe, by enhancing the economic resilience and economic stability through the forging the closer economic cooperation and the strengthened economic integration within the region. And I believe that in the future, the RCI will continue to provide such a counterbalance against negative development of geo-economic policies in the future. We, ADB, have been championing the RCI as one of the key strategic pillars since its establishment back in 1966, and also as was confirmed by our Strategy 2050, and also relevant operation plan under the strategy, and also RCI strategy back in 2006, as was mentioned by Rolando in his presentation. So I think that we will continue to partner with the regional economies in deepening RCI in such areas as the infrastructure connectivity, trade facilitation, free trade agreement, the environment agreement, the digital economic agreement, digital economic partnership agreement, DEPA, and in particular, climate cooperation. And I hope we all will be able to join these efforts together going forward. With it, I'd like to thank all the speakers for joining us today and sharing their insights and the views and the perspectives, which has made the discussion today very rich and informative for all of us. And I would also like to thank all the participants who have joined us today. Last but not least, let me also thank Rolando and his team for organizing this very compact yet a very impactful event for all of us. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jong. And with that, we conclude the day today. So we have, in case you want, there is coffee and biscuits outside. And we thank you again for being here, especially those of you who traveled from very far to make it to this event. And for speakers, as mentioned, we will have a dinner. So please let us know if you are free to join. And thank you to our participants and external participants as well for your presence today. Okay, thank you and see you soon.